Hey everybody, welcome to TNMCoaching Unplugged and Zoran Todorovic Interconnected podcast. I'm so grateful and happy and joyful that you're with us once again, and super grateful that you're sharing our podcast with your loved ones and that our community is growing. We're receiving a lot of beautiful comments and it's all for you. As you know, this is the space when you come to elevate your heart, to elevate your mind, to connect your soul, to explore yourself through the lenses of these wonderful guests we're having week after week, and it's a space to regroup, to recenter, and to learn something new. Today, it's very, really, really special. I'm so excited about our guests. Our guests. He's multidimensional being of love and light. He's one of the pioneers in the world of the breathwork, and the breathwork is really big today. I mean, I was talking to my friends the other day, and everybody's talking about breathwork. Everybody's practicing breathwork. Do know what they're doing, and I have to say, some of the people don't know what they're doing when it comes to breathwork. And today, I'm so grateful to have this pioneer teacher who is also an author of Alchemy of Breath, which is one of the world's leading breathwork schools. Through his training in his global campus, Breathe the World sessions, Anthony is guided thousands of people to reconnect to their inner intelligence of the breath and to create this bridge between body, mind, and spirit. Today, myself and Anthony are going to explore consciousness of the breath, how breath impacts our creativity, how can breath help us release our trauma, expand our awareness, and really help us to reconnect that to what truly matters. I also want to give a special shout and invitation to our business audience. As you know, a lot of you who are listening to TNM Unplugged come from the corporations, from business. A lot of you are entrepreneurs who are running your own businesses, and you come into this sanctuary of this podcast to learn something new and to empower yourselves. And for you specifically, today's session is dedicated to help you understand how this practice of the breathwork can help you become a better leader, become a better human being, get to know yourself in a better way, lead your team in a different way, minimize stress, minimize anxiety, minimize tension in this role that you're leading and living in when everything is overemphasized and overactivated. So this whole space of coming back to yourself, coming back to your breath, it's something super, super important. And before we begin, I would love you to take the deep breath in and out, of course. And throughout this conversation, let's breathe together and let's connect together and learn from this wonderful guest that I have for you today. Anthony, welcome. Glad to have you.
What a pleasure. I hope I can match the expectations you've just created. Thank you. Thank you for having me on, Zoran. It's a joy. It's a joy to, even if I can open just 1% more awareness of how critical this relationship is with our breath and how bountiful our lives become when we just open up just a little to its power and its force.
Exactly. And at the beginning of the podcast, I always ask people, what was your journey into it? Because I'm always curious, a little bit tiny about your hero's journey into the breath. So in your life, what happened to get you to arrive to the point when you are now a pioneer and teacher of the breathwork? And I know it can be a long story, but in a nutshell, how did you arrive to this point?
Well, I was first awakened to the power of breath as an 8-year-old. I was at boarding school and not happy, and didn't want to be away from home. And someone came up to me and had me breathe into a paper bag, and I did that for 20 breaths, and he squeezed my chest and put me down on the ground, and all of a sudden I was reminded. I think it's as close to what people describe as a near-death experience. It was just illuminating, and all the issues I thought I had with life, not being a happy young boy, were just diminished. They just vanished because I understood the proportion of something infinite. I felt like I touched the infinite. And ever since then, the breath has been my best friend. And that's what I would wish for anybody, is to negotiate this journey toward the breath. And just breath awareness in itself changes so much. But I then stayed with it and practiced it whenever I could. I studied pranayama as a 20-year-old for many years, and then different types of breathing practices. But, to actually start what I started and to have founded Alchemy, it was I almost, as the breath, almost an invisible thing. All of a sudden, I was moved in a breath session. So I went and I thought, well, I'm going to go study this because I want to know more. I want to study it professionally. And so I did. I went to 2 different schools and came out the other end and started to offer breath work. And it just never stopped. From then on, the room filled, there were queues waiting outside, and that then transported onto the internet. I was the first person to bring breathwork online, and that really meant no more borders. So the Breathe the World that you mentioned earlier on is an event that we have 700 or 800 people come to every week, and that's really cross culture, cross paradigm, cross work life, all different forms of life come together and breathe together, and that's another whole thing. So the power of the breath is something that we've ignored. And my purpose, my job is to help people understand how benign it is and how incredibly powerful it can be.
Mm-hmm. And I really would love to use this opportunity in talking to you to go to this 101 of the breath work. I know that this can be a little bit a foundational question for you because you're quite advanced in your practice and how you teach people. But for the audience that are listening to this podcast, especially people who've never had any conscious relationship to their breath, they never connected the breath to, calming up their nervous system, never connected breath through regulating their stress, never connected breath through being present more in the moment. Like people who are Anthony busy bees, people who are running organizations and businesses and are consistently in this motion. If you were to, explain to them 101, what is the breath work? Why is that beneficial for them? And what are the outcomes? What would you say to that?
I think, first of all, we need to review how we see this thing called the breath, because in today's world, the times that we're aware of the breath are usually the times that we don't have enough and we're out of breath, or maybe something takes our breath away. We use the word breathtaking. We refer to the breath with cliches in many different languages, but we don't really give it the full attendance or attention that it could have. So to give it a sense of proportion, I encourage people, especially at the 101 stage, just to imagine what actually happened when you took your first breath, what was happening. That was actually your first moment of agency, your first moment of autonomy after the umbilical was cut, that you actually learnt to survive on your own without being nurtured or kept alive by any other entity. Now, other things happen too. You cleaned out your lungs. Your lungs have liquid when you're in the womb, and then when you come out, that they partially empty. But your first breath helps you clear out your lungs. So it's your first act of autonomy, and you can just take a moment and imagine what that would have been like, all of a sudden to be kickstarted into life with this massive sense of acceptance and wonder and aliveness, because of course breath is life force. So that's just the birth breath, the breath of coming into the world, and we repeat that. Obviously, every time that we breathe in, as a metaphor at least, we're doing that again and again. But there's also the death breath, and that's the breath which I call the big sigh. Just the last breath. And for those of us that have had the opportunity, the honor to see someone breathe their last breath, I think we would all agree how profound a moment that is to witness. And we can only imagine how profound a moment it is to experience. It's the letting go of everything that has to do with planetary existence. It's letting go of all the bills, all the problems, all the arguments, all the good, all the difficult, the whole thing. And so this cycle of each breath is actually, the birth is a repeat, but the exhale is a practice. We're practicing this letting go. And, when we do sigh and when we do use our breath consciously, there's a lot that we can actually let go of in terms of physical tensions, the settling of the nervous system back into homeostasis. We can sigh over anything and we'll feel a sense of growing ease begin immediately. So then the question, and I think this is an intriguing question, is, well, what are we missing the rest of the time? Because we're breathing 25,000 times a day, and we're only rarely aware of it. So what are we missing? What are we missing in terms of not just a toolkit for nervous system hacking or regulation, but the sense of life and death being present in every moment? And I know we live in a culture where we think the bookshelf of life is never ending. We just keep adding more chapters and more books, and we don't think that it's going to come to an end. But my experience with dealing with people, both at end of life and also during and thriving in life, is that when we are aware there is an end to the bookshelf, when we are aware that there is a death at the end of everything, we tend to live much more functionally with a completely different set of priorities. And I see people who are given terminal diagnoses that all of a sudden are learning how valuable each breath is, of course. And honestly, we never know when we've only got 10 left. None of us know how many breaths we've got left. And so I think the importance of understanding that we live in this contained context in life is it's a tiny part of that message I got when I was 8 years old. No matter how stressful life may seem, or overwhelming, or challenging, or even exciting, the awareness that it will all come to one final sigh, I think, really helps us keep things in proportion.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for explaining that so beautifully. And in today's world, I also feel that connection to the breath, it's really our superpower in a way, because there's a lot of tension, there's a lot of stimulation, there's a lot of overstimulations. We're getting busier and busier. Technology is shaping us in a very interesting way. The emergence of the AI, the social media, how distant are we becoming from ourselves? When I talk to people in the organizations, they're so busy. The busy is the new normal. We're busy, 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 busy. And that busy means people don't have moment to connect. So I think the breath is becoming something that is our superpower, and something that can help us a lot to live fulfilled lives. So when you work with people, you teach people the breathwork, what would you say are the most beneficial outcomes of somebody investing time to learn the technique, or investing time to start practicing this in their everyday life? What did you see in people? Transformations, sometimes miracles. What was how did you witness this?
Definitely transformation, definitely miracles. I said that first breath is our first act of agency. I think in purely practical terms, about you're either in the middle of the day or in the middle of your evening right now, that the change that you can create immediately is moving away from reactivity and moving towards creativity. And I think these two words are relevant because, first of all, there's only one letter difference. If you take the word reactive and you move that C back to the beginning of the word, all of a sudden you have agency. You're now co-creating life. You're not being done by life. You're actually playing and dancing with life. How that plays out is enormous because we're engaging choice. So instead of reacting, which means doing it again, right? Reacting, we get to
repeating, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. But all we're going to do when we react is actually reenact the same cycle of behavior that's happening either in ourselves or with other people or in an organization. So if we want to move forwards, if we want to get traction and create shift and change, then it's paramount that we use our choices. We realize that we have a choice, and that all begins with one conscious breath. Just the decision to be aware of how you're breathing actually changes the way you breathe. And it changes a lot more. It puts you in the role of witness instead of the one that's totally experiencing. You're able to stand away a little bit, get more overview. You have time to consider, and that consideration might be, well, I think I'll take another 10 breaths. And those 10 breaths get to be used to let your nervous system settle, to make wiser observations, and as a result, wiser choices. So that's the really practical, nuts and bolts, day-to-day example. When we not only give our consciousness to our breath, but when we connect our breaths, and that means no pause between the inhale and the exhale. So it's, imagine a violin solo and the music is just never stops. That bow on the violin is going back and forth all the time. That's what we do with our breath when we breathe what's called a connected breath. And then we're stacking this awareness. We're creating an awareness stack, and it piles up. And the more breaths we do, and our sessions on Sundays, for example, are 30 minutes. That's a relatively short session, but that is enough. And you see it in the chat box every week that people are experiencing extraordinary things. And why is that? Part of it is physiological. Because we are now learning how to master our nervous system and master our point of view, in other words, our perspective. But there are also psychological things happening. The physiologically, first of all, we're slowing down the oxygen flow to the frontal lobe. We're increasing it in the bloodstream. And by slowing down the frontal lobe, that means we don't think as efficiently with the normal motors that we have with that monkey mind. You know, the Buddhists say we have somewhere between 20 and 60,000 thoughts a day. It doesn't leave a lot of space for something new to come in. But when you breathe like this, it creates that space. So our perceptual awareness begins to open to other stimuli, the ones that are not so obvious. You might call them the subtle ones. And it's in that subtle realm that these, quote, miracles can occur, these leaps of awareness, leaps of understanding. It's as if we're looking at one side of the coin our whole lives. And when you go into a connected breath practice, all of a sudden you see it from the other side. It's like, oh my goodness, I never thought about it that way. So if you're feeling stuck, if there's hostility in any atmosphere, bringing the breath into it will melt it. I remember I founded a restaurant called Alchemy in Indonesia 15 years ago, and we had a board meeting coming up, and we had one person who was really disgruntled. She was not happy at all, and we were expecting it to be a very challenging conversation. And I thought, well, I'm just going to try it. So I said, as we walked in the room, can we all take 10 breaths together before we begin? And everybody said, sure, okay, let's do that. So everybody did except her. She was absolutely resolute. No, I'm not going to do this. So the rest of us did it, and you could see her going through her like persnickety, like challenge. But actually what happened as a result of that was she changed completely. She changed because she knew that the way she was going to present herself was actually not going to get her what she wanted. Even because we created the breathing space, she used the space to understand that she needed to show up in a different way. And the level of care in the group for her was not about her being against or being antagonist or negative. It was about, how can we help you be aligned with the vision we serve? And I think this is really, in the corporate world, where it's most valuable, is that we can create a connection with the vision and the mission if we use our breath. And it doesn't matter whether you're at founder level, and I work with many founders and entrepreneurs, or at the lowest level of the hierarchy or the organization. There's always a way to use the breath to connect to a unity that exists amongst us. I mean, we're all human. And when we accept each other's humanity and we care about each other's humanity, the whole mechanism can move forward in a completely different way, in a quantum way. We can accomplish things in the practical world in a much, much more efficient way. And the same for anybody who's involved in any therapeutic process, coaching, psychotherapy, analysis, whatever it might be. When people use the breath, they get these massive leaps forward. I've had coaches say, my God, since I've started incorporating the breath, I can get 10 sessions into one. In just those 3 minutes, when I get this person to breathe, they get it. The penny drops, and they can get the messages and the downloads that they need. same with psychotherapy, same with those who have difficulty meditating. I mean, isn't it infuriating that the time we need to meditate is the time when we least feel like it, right? Like, I've got too much to do. There's no way I'm going to create space for that. But even those 10 breaths will make you much more efficient in what you're going to do afterwards. If you take a whole breath work, you're going to come back like feeling like a queen or a king. Like, I've really done my work. Now I can apply myself with a devotion and a focus that has been polished. Like, I'm polishing my lens of perception. Nothing's going to pass me by. I'm hyper alert, hyper aware. I'm up to speed, and I can also slow down when I need to. I know how to use this accelerator and brake instead of it just being about being on the A train day and night. So regulating our nervous system means we can apply ourselves selectively, we can respond instead of react, and we move into creative mode. So watch out, world, things will shift when we get to play with it that way.
Yeah, I love that, distinction between reactive and creative, and how we move with our breath into the creation as well, because it's such an innate part of everybody. And I think once when people get in relationship with their breath, they get in relationship with themselves on a deeper level as well. They get to understand, themselves also, and they can co-create and shift their perspectives. Now, another kind of, foundational question for you. You mentioned the connected breath. For people who don't understand what it is, who never heard about connected breath and the breathwork practice, how would you describe that? What is that, and how does it work?
Well, unfortunately, Zoom doesn't replicate very well because the sound of breath is so subtle that you can't really hear it. But when I'm expressing it, I usually try breathe through my mouth so people can hear it more. But really think of, I mean, I'll move my hand, and this is my breath. So I will breathe with it. And I'll just turn my original sound for musicians on there. Sometimes it helps, sometimes it doesn't. But
yeah.
So if you just breathed with my hand, you would be breathing a connected breath. And you can see it's never stopping. It's always flowing up and down. And the key to the connected breath is inhaling all the way, and then exhaling about 70%, not all the way to the bottom, because that's when you pause. So that connection is paramount. That's what's important. When you connect it, that's how you really raise the oxygen in the bloodstream, and that's how you'll get the strongest effect. That said, I'm bound to say, please don't just go off and do this for an hour while you're driving a car, or while you're on, if you're without a facilitator or someone who can guide you through it. Because as you said, Zoran, at first, the breathwork world is just exploded. And we've watched that right from the beginning. I was part of the reason it did when it went on the internet. Please be cautious. Check the people that you're breathing with. Check where they studied. Check whether where they studied is accredited, because people now open up breathwork schools and say they'll train you in a weekend for $90 with recordings, and that's not going to work. That's not how it works. Breathwork opens us up to a whole new realm of senses, and it's not always beautiful. It's not always easy. It's actually one of the best ways to meet the darker parts of our lives, the things that we carry, like lack of forgiveness and guilt, and the shadow space, anger, fear. Breath is one of the best ways for us to learn how to be the master of things such as anxiety and stress. So it does also include the opportunity to review these parts of our human condition when we're in the breath state. And that's when we can see the other side of the coin. So it's not always comfortable. Sometimes it can be ecstatic and amazing and invigorating. And sometimes, well, I felt tremendous sadness. I felt the pain of the things that are unresolved in my marriage or in my life. But the ability to feel and to breathe. And I know a lot of us in business, there's no time to feel. I've got to carry on. There's too much on my list. I'm going to beat the list, the monster of the list that we can never quite master. it's so important that we slow down, because then even the list itself becomes questionable. Even the order of priorities that we thought were there, even that can shift. And one thing I promise is that it will always shift in a healthy direction. It will never be worse after a breathwork session. And so there's very much in the way that we teach at Alchemy is, especially for people who find it difficult to feel, to allow themselves gradually to feel more and meet the feelings with the breath. And that is one of the most deeply calming, restorative acts we can do. And the reason for that is because when we were kids and we were hurt or wounded, we lost our breath. So now we're consciously reclaiming agency. Every time we choose a fresh breath, we're consciously reclaiming that agency, and we're consciously letting go of something that is no good. Whatever it is for you in this moment that you want to get rid of, you can actually just blow it away. You literally can blow it away with each breath.
I would love to ask you something which is completely unrelated, but something that is important for me personally. And I can see that smoking was something that happened in the past, and a lot of people use smoking and inhaling, exhaling. And nowadays, I can see vaping, especially in the younger generation. Like I go into the businesses and I think, oh my God, smoking is gone, but then people sit outside the offices and they keep on vaping and inhaling in that way. How can we support that, letting go of that addiction? And what is the connection between this smoking addiction and vaping addiction to the breath work from your perspective?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I mean, you've chosen the particular addiction that is about breathing. And a lot of what I'm going to say will apply to any addiction, not just to lung, smoking, for example, or vaping. But the way I stopped, I used to be a smoker. I was born into a family of smokers. My mum smoked all the way through her pregnancy. She smoked 60 or 70 cigarettes a day. So I was born into tobacco. And it wasn't until my 40s that I realized I'd better stop. Otherwise, this was going to kill me. And my mother died when I was 32 from lung cancer. I think the way I did it was every time I wanted to have a cigarette, I would take 3 deep breaths. It was like at the 5th or 6th time I tried to give up, but I thought this time, okay, I'm going to carry a pack with me, and every time I want one, I'm just going to look at that pack and I'm going to take 3 very deep breaths and just experience that. And what I found was that each time that I did it, I beat the rap. I escaped the desire. It was like the desire passed, that peak of desire passed in those 3 breaths, because I allowed it to be there and I met it with my breath. And that's symbolic of all the problems that I face and my students and the people that breathe with us at Alchemy. If we feel what it is that we think we need to run away from and meet it with our breath, all of a sudden we're not the David and the problem is not the Goliath. It's the other way around. We become masterful, and what we thought was overwhelming us then takes a much smaller proportion. Now, I often say I don't really teach about the breath. I teach about how we can use the mind, how we can optimize our lives, how we can expand our consciousness. And the breath is the best tool that I've ever found. And I've tried everyone that I've ever met. But a lot of addiction is much more deeply rooted in trauma, in childhood. And a lot of our work is about working with the inner child, which is that part of us that loves ice cream or giggles, those times that you giggle uncontrollably for no reason at all, and you just experience that flushing joy of life. A lot of our work is about reclaiming that too. So I have a process I've developed called the bridge, which is a half hour to 40-minute process that helps people regain contact with that joyful part of themselves by reclaiming their childhood, the parts of their childhood that had to be suppressed or put in the cupboard or were wounded because of trauma or abuse, that instead of losing parts of who we are, that we can really reclaim them to become more whole and more present, have more presence of mind, more acute processing power, more presence of heart. You know, I do believe we all want to love and be loved. I do believe fundamentally under that, no matter what kind of behavior we put on top of it, there's a part of us that just wants to care and be cared for. And this is the best way I've found to render ourselves available to others for that. But more importantly, to ourselves, it starts right here at home. So yeah, it's the joy of using this power tool. It's kind of like like you said, superpower. It's a power tool rather than pulling out the old screwdriver. It's much, much quicker.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I can witness to that myself. When I practiced breathwork when I first came along, it transformed and changed my life. Now, as we kind of gently coming to the close of this podcast, specifically for people in business, and from your perspective of the high level of stress and anxiety, high level of pressure, two questions that I have for you. You mentioned that part of your work is not only teaching people how to breathe, but it's also teaching them how to expand their conscious awareness and become more awakened either human beings. And then, of course, through the breathwork practice, you can help them as well, practical level, reclaim their agency and authority over their life, which I love. So, what do you feel or see it's important for the leaders in business specifically to become aware of? Where do you feel this evolutionary pulse? What is the consciousness asking from us on the level of humanity? Where do we need to go? And then how can you try to support us in that direction?
Thank you. That's just a beautiful question, and it touches me deeply because this is really where my front edge, my cutting edge of inquiry is right now. There's a new world coming, whether we want it to or not. We've just seen the democratization of knowledge. It now has no value. It's a few buttons away. So whatever we thought we knew that other people didn't is no longer the case. We're also looking at, excuse me, we're looking at a new world where a certain percentage of people will not have a job anymore. Our whole interpretation of what time and freedom is about to be shifted. The question is, do we want to participate in that shift in a productive and creative way, or are we going to be upended and be the tail of the dog rather than the dog itself? So a lot of my questioning is, what does leadership look like in this new world? The whole axis of our existence is shifting profoundly by the minute. And I remember Mo Godat saying it's now double exponential. This isn't just exponential, it's double, it's exponentially exponential. So let's fast forward a little bit and imagine what that world will be like and ask ourselves, what is the role we wish to take? And really use our imagination, which is a phenomenal power. The greatest things that have ever been invented in the world have started with imagination. So let us create the breathing space to use our imagination and learn to pre-inhabit this new world condition so we can be familiar with it. So I guess an example of that is, like, none of us have been to the moon, right? But we can send things up there and we can see what the landscape's like because of our technology. I'm saying let's use our technology of the brain that we're only using a tiny part of to fast forward and really inhabit the view and the feelings that we would have when that change has occurred, when the whole relationship between employment and unemployment and leisure has all of a sudden been remixed and lands again. Where do you want to be? And what does that look like for you? How do you wish to relate to other people? What does, as I said, what does leadership look like for you? And the other thing that I think is of critical importance is that we need to pay attention to the types of conversation that we attach ourselves to. As this polarization that we're seeing gets more and more extreme in the world, it's as if the machine is wearing quickly and more quickly until eventually it just can't do anything but explode or implode, whichever it might be. How do we create new conversations rather than unconsciously ally ourselves with the polarization that exists? So one of the principles of my work and of alchemy is to be able to create these new conversations by accepting the ones that exist, accepting the separation that exists, but not investing in it. And when we are triggered and activated by what we see in social media, from the lowest to the highest form of social media that exists, we tend to want to agree or disagree. I don't agree with what you're saying about that prime minister or that. I'm going to fight for the other side. And this is exactly the kind of conversation that creates the problem. So the question I get to ask myself is, am I actually being a part of the solution or a part of the problem? And the only way to be a part of the solution is to create new avenues of thought and new avenues of conversation. So my wish is that we could all take that breath, take that time, step back a moment, and really consider whether this conversation is worthy of your energy.
Yeah. Anthony Abbagnano, we can talk forever.
I would love that.
We can talk forever, Kabir. At the end of our podcast, one of my coach of the podcast, she's a powerful woman. She told me, keep your podcast short and sweet, and then involve the conversation more in the teachings. So I would love to invite everybody to take what we got from Anthony today, to go to his website, to visit, to learn, to open up to something new. And I love what you shared at the end. I mean, for me, that was a golden nugget for everybody to bookmark and remember. How can we create the avenues instead of creating the old? So thank you so much for today.
It's been a pleasure, Zoran. I hope to see you soon.
I'll see each other soon. Bye for now.
Bye.